So this is a picture of a meeting, meeting attended by members of the Labour Party in Shadwell Ward at the beginning of 2010. And this is one that was held about the same time at a location near the Cambridge Road in Bethnal Green. So it was probably Bethnal Green South Ward. These are the two pictures that we have out of literally hundreds that were taken during the so-called campaign against the referendum against the question, yes or no. So it was in support of the no campaign for the purpose of the referendum. Now, in part D, I referred to the meeting held in Hanbury Street, where George Galloway made the remark that in his entire political career, he had not come across a council as corrupt as Tower Hamlets Council. Now, that was made in April 2006. And 4 years later, it was Galloway who was widely involved in the bid to have Tower Hamlets Council turned into an officially corrupt council. That is what the effect of having an elected mayor is. And Galloway was completely unprepared, absolutely unprepared for the kind of challenge that he faced in 2014 when he spoke against the commissioners, not because the commissioners were unfit, which they were, but Galloway spoke against the fact that Eric Pickles, then community secretary in the cabinet of the Conservative Cameron, had sent commissioners to take over the administration of Tower Hamlets Council because of the failure by the incumbent, quote, in the elected mayor post, Lutfur Rahman. Because Galloway delivered a completely irresponsible, ignorant, misleading, and totally ridiculous series of words against the commissioners and against Eric Pickles and in support of Lutfur Rahman. Now that was November 2014. And we are now into November, the first day of November today, 2020. So it's 6 years. And in the 6 years that have passed since Galloway made that ignorant, irresponsible, untruthful, unsubstantiable claim or series of claims in favor of Lutfur Rahman and against Eric Pickles and Pickles as commissioners, Galloway has undergone several detours, politically, physically, geographically. In every case, he has been found to have been exposed as being immature, politically very immature, because he staged a series of stunts against the Labour Party fronted by Corbyn while still maintaining that Corbyn was a friend of his or he was a friend of Corbyn's. George Galloway showed that if given the opportunity to democratically reverse the corrupt council, Tower Hamlets Council's corruption, and make it a corruption-free council, then Galloway would have no clue as to how to do it. We revived Galloway's political fortune between January 2006 and we continued to support him for another 3 years. Until it became clear that he was veering away from any principle about fighting corruption. And he was getting involved in the new corruption move to have an elected mayor foisted on Tower Hamlets Council. So we gave up. We didn't support Galloway. And the fact that we didn't support Galloway is not a theoretical assertion. On the 6th of February 2010, I led the campaign outside the venue of the pro-elected mayor referendum side campaigns kind of launch, which was at the Brady Center in Hanbury Street. I paid from my own pocket for the battery for the charging of the loudhailer, which itself was borrowed from a location in Shadwell, and the transportation of the borrowed loudhailer from Shadwell to the Hanbury Street was paid for by me from my own pocket, the minicab, 2 minicab trips. So altogether on that occasion alone, I spent more money than I had independently available to spare. So in order to fund those activities, I went without very many essentials. And that is the amount of money that I spent, equivalent to about £25 or thereabouts on that occasion alone. Given that I don't have any kind of business to run, I didn't have any address from which to run the business of offering any services that people needed and could pay for. It was a significant amount of money, which is the equivalent of what I spend every single time I do something to defend the community, including today's newspapers, as I said. Today's Sunday newspapers on the 1st of November, Clear Street newspapers cost $18.30 or $18.50. I shall be adding up the prices soon. So if you multiply, say on average, £20, because today's newspapers do not include the one that is also part of the list of British papers that we diagnose, that is the Morning Star, strictly for evidence. We do not subscribe to the views of any of the newspapers because they're all immoral. There is no morality to subscribe to. So if you multiply the expenditure on newspapers alone by decades every day, so if you say on average the cost of newspapers is about £20, including various titles, not just the daily newspapers, but other titles like magazines and others. It would be literally, on the cover price alone, it would be millions of pounds. And if you add the other work that I have to do and have to fund, other work requiring more than 20 pounds per day, the resources. And if you add also the other work, the research, fact checking. So the daily physical expenditure on the physical materials on average has to be in the region of 60 to 70 pounds every day. So on all those, I have raised the funds. I have not raised the funds from any public source or from any donation or anyone donating or anything. I've raised the funds mainly by my own credit, if you like, or credibility. So a significant amount of the sum I have raised has been loans from person or persons that I know or have known, not from any banks or any financial institutions. So I've been doing this for decades. And why this is important in this edition of the KHOODEELAAR television program, part E, is because I want to expand on the description of the course in the context of housing. Now, if we put aside the costs of the newspapers and the other media and resources that have been needed to be used in order to do the campaign work, which is every day, then the question arises as to the citing of the materials, the newspapers, the magazines, and the storage devices, including the various types and models and versions of computers. So if you add together, it would be represented in a simplified form by about 10 trips by a van, an average size van, which is what has happened in the course of the last 50 years in East London. And the trips have been forced by the corrupt Hamlets Council, which has maintained series and serial attacks and obstruction against my having a settled home. That is briefly put. Whereas Lutfur Rahman paid hundreds of millions of pounds of council money, including to those who didn't even apply for the money. And none of the parties or groups that Lutfur Rahman gave the money to has anything to show for it. There is no evidence. And I'm saying this on the record, and anyone can check whether what I'm saying is factually provable. And I'm saying that it is provable. So what I have been doing every day has been the equivalent work, equivalent to the work done by a dedicated team of about 10 people that can be found in any of the UK central government departments or in number 10 Downing Street, or at an organization such as the United Nations, one of the agencies of the United Nations. That is the factual, material, physical, and comparable kind of in terms of the volume and in terms of the amount of intellectual work needed that I do every day. Because that is the basic amount of work that is needed in order to make the kind of factual comments that can be stood up and can be substantiated about events and about policies and about behavior. So what I said about this post holder called Jackie Odunoy in the previous parts of today's diagnosis. Odunoy was employed in Hamlets Council, and she held senior posts, senior enough to have allocated to her a personal assistant at a cost to the council. So that is a measure of the seniority that she was given. Jackie Odunoy, Colin Cormack, Aman Dalby. These are the three that I have mentioned. And I've called them all liars and all criminals. In addition to Steve Hill, who I mention more often than these three in the context of Steve Hill's longer running criminality. So these four criminals have been paid over the years several million pounds in so-called salaries and parks and whatever. And these criminals have violated the stated aims and purpose of the council, and also the written kind of purpose of the council, and they have broken the law, and they have committed conspiracy, and they have committed crimes to what is generally called obstruction of justice. And they have, all of them, been involved in the causing of the losses of the work that I have been doing. As I said, that the attacks caused the use of vehicles for transporting the documents and the materials across East London, and including at least 10 van loads of materials. So these materials have been held at more than one address because of the size of them. And these are not items that could be included as part of somebody's single flat. These are and have been parts of the operation in defense of the community, equivalent to the resources of a university department, major university department, not a newly set up university department, but a major dedicated university department, or the equivalent of a major reference library, such as the one that exists in Charing Cross area and is owned by the Westminster Council as a part of the Westminster Libraries. So that is the location, that is the kind of premises that would be just about enough to accommodate the materials and resources and the documents. So instead of recognizing that need, the criminals in Hamlets Council have treated the resources as the most urgent targets for attacks by them. And they did attack. And the details of the attacks are, of course, going to be expanded on and included in the forthcoming kind of versions and the editions. So on top of running the programs and the campaigns, I obviously needed a place for ordinary living. And the criminals have made sure that I didn't have a place. So where do I actually start the explanation of that battle? It is one of the most fundamental, essential needs every single person has. So if the council obstructs my having a home, I mean, that doesn't need explaining, but that is what has been happening. So the battle to have a home against all these odds has been unique, world exclusive, unique. While I'm having the responsibility of maintaining the ever increasing volumes of research and action materials, as well as the storage devices and as well as the computer devices. And they have been kept kind of being moved from one location to another because there has not been any consideration for storing them at a secure location for long enough. Consideration by the council. So I have had to find other addresses which have been subjected to combined attack by the council with the collusion of other criminals not employed by the council but engaged in complicity with the sole aim of destroying the work. And the work contains evidence, daily evidence, as I said, the equivalent of a team of at least 10 dedicated persons, and included original work, research work, reference work. Original work included original manuscripts, writings, compositions, translations. And these are also unique because nobody who is supposedly an applicant for a home or a housing or a flat can have any issues to store and keep their work materials. But the nature of the work that I have been involved in doing has been consistently such and of such wide diversity and engagement and urgency that a place like the Westminster Reference Library alone could have been the beginning of an accommodation where I could do the necessary continuing other relevant work. So this has been repeatedly subjected to attacks by the crooks in Hamlets Council. And I shall separately describe the criminality of each of the criminals I have named, and then I shall describe other criminals' crimes. To start the crimes committed by Colin Cormack, let's go back to the Royal London Hospital. Remember the Royal London Hospital? The Royal London Hospital, based in Stepney in Whitechapel, was the owner of the freehold at the address in New Road that I treated almost as a home because I stayed there for more than 20 years. although it was not furnished as a home, but as an address, as a location, it was almost like a home. But the main purpose was to store my ongoing activities and files and so on. There was no office because there was no furniture and there was no time to acquire an office. Why that was is nothing to do with the Royal London Hospital, but with members of my immediate biological family who behaved like immigrants. I never behaved like an immigrant. I behaved like an independent international person, not as an immigrant. And I still don't. And I don't think that I should be kind of treated as an immigrant in the sense that immigrants and migrants are treated as, with prejudice and with denial. That is the point I'm making. Members of my family were misled into thinking that the premises in New Road were worth much more than they were being allowed to produce. And the reason why the money was not being generated was because of my occupation of the premises. There are small rooms, there are 4 small rooms, but I was occupying all 4 rooms. That was the reason why my members of my kind of biological family were convinced that if somehow they could kind of advise me to seek council housing, then all the financial kind of income that they were told they were missing would be kind of replaced by steady and significant flow of money that they thought they would get. Well, all of this was happening during the 1980s. So this is now 35, say 36, 37 years since all of that began, really in earnest. And the members of my biological family had no interest in nor awareness of what I was doing in the wider society. Because quite apart from doing campaigns for the Bangladeshis in Tower Hamlets against racism, I was also involved in a number of significant initiatives for what is now called human rights, but actually for defending the communities under attack, communities with the Caribbean backgrounds and African backgrounds and other people. Especially during the 1970s, I took part in various events in Notting Hill, in the discussions, in the planning, in the analysis, and the organization of various kind of activities against racist attacks on the mainly Caribbean origin people. And I was the only Asian person that I could remember from those times. And my purpose was to unite on a political kind of series of agreements and points people from various backgrounds in the Caribbean, in African backgrounds, Asian backgrounds, so that there could be a permanent forum and more to identify racism and to educate the wider society about the evils of racism that affects everyone and badly. So these were projects that I helped to initiate. And while I was doing that, unknown to my biological family, I was doing all of that. And they were being kind of groomed into thinking that I was sitting on a gold mine, that is the address in New Road. And I was occupying the gold mine and I was preventing them from mining the gold mine. And if only I would accept the principle, they were told that I would get decent housing by the local council, then all the problems of their not getting access to the gold in the gold mine would be solved. Now that was the conversation of people that could be only compared with pre-Lilliputians, if you like. People lacking, not only lacking basic common sense, but lacking any common sense at all. Because the council would be the last agency to help me settle down in a home or help me in any way. Because they saw me then and they see me now. And in between, they have seen me as the main cause for public awareness about their corruption and their misdeeds. So if you go back to the late 1960s, when the address in New Road was subjected to attack by Tower Hamlets Council, but I was not in residence at that time at that address, but I was involved from a distance with the defense of the address against the council's attacks. So if we start from 1960s, so it is 70, 80, 90, 2000, it is 60 years now. So the assaults have gone on for 60 years from the council. So for my biological family members to have suggested to me a wisdom based on pre-Lilliputian emptiness of brainlessness defies any condemnation. Whereas I was involved in not only opposing the racists, attacking the Notting Hill people and the wider Black community, and I'm talking about the 70s, I was also involved in thinking up and updating my thoughts about the issues of poverty and hunger and famine and destitution and the serious causes that force people to migrate from their home countries to another country or other countries. So I was doing that. So I've been doing this for 60 plus years, let's say. And instead of supporting my work, whoever has been in place in control in the corrupt Tower Hamlets Council has been looking for excuses to obstruct my work. In an objective analysis, my work has been nothing but pure morality and ethics. How could anyone in the right minds attack that kind of work? But that has been going on. So I have been treated with serial obstructions by Tower Hamlets Council employees. So that is the general introduction of the update. How does Colin Cormack appear? He appears because when the Royal London Hospital were told that the floor of one of the kind of rooms had collapsed and narrowly escaped or avoided or missed hitting somebody seriously. they, instead of repairing the property, they put the property up for auction. Not only that property, but other properties in the street. And they did that, which amounted to mass eviction of hundreds of people in the year 1987-88. And our property, or the property where I lived or I was existing in, was bought by a person at auction. Because I didn't have the cash to buy it, and I didn't have the support of my biological family to buy it, because remember, they were already being groomed to get rid of the occupation of the property so that they would get the money. That was the grooming. I didn't know that, but that is what was the reason why they opposed our collectively buying the property at the auction. So this is the point where we shall take the break here and continue with the auction in the next part, which will be F or 6, part 6.